So in 2004, I was 38 years old. I was dating a 24-year-old economist, and I took her to my very first and only Air Supply concert. It was in San Diego. Firefly played the warm-up, and she'd never heard of Air Supply. So all of its music was completely unfamiliar to her. And so Air Supply were these old blokes, in their 60s, hopping around on stage. The main singer was heavily covered in tattoos, was completely sleeved. And she says it's the first concert she's ever been to where the crowd was mainly sitting the whole time. So I had a backstage pass where I could go meet my heroes, but I didn't bother. In 2005, I started up my own Air Supply blog, airsupplyforever.blogspot.com. And the consequence to that, I finally got an email from someone. Seemed like he might know what he was doing. He just talked about what horrible people the two lead members of Air Supply were. But in my emotional life, they were a big deal. I think I first got my own radio around 1978. So I'd been in the United States few months, and part of my assimilation process was learning American sports and then obsessing about American sports. So I used my radio principally to listen to the news and to listen to sports coverage and sports talk radios in the Napa Valley, so mainly listening to San Francisco radio stations. And then my parents were called back to Washington, D.C., the Seventh-day Adventist Church headquarters, in the fall of 1979. And I went to stay with a friend of the family. So I was about halfway through 8th grade. I was left behind so I could finish 8th grade with my friends. So for the first time in my life, I started listening to popular music. And it was fantastic. It was amazing. Because these songs just talked about everything that was going on with me. Like all my deepest, darkest secrets, yearnings, needs, emotions were all articulated in an irresistible way in these songs. And so it was 8th grade. I was increasingly obsessed with girls. I'd been pretty strongly interested in girls for at least 3 years by this point. But now I was obsessed because I think I really found out vividly by 8th grade, perhaps earlier, that when I became obsessed with a girl, all my other problems went away. Now the language I would use is getting high from the emotion about thinking about a girl. And I think it was in 7th grade that I learned that you could call girls on the phone. And so there's this one girl that I liked, and a couple of blokes in my class who were on the upper end of class popularity. Got to hang out with them one Saturday afternoon, and I learned that you could call girls, and so they called this girl that I liked, Denise Bernard, and they asked her who she liked. She kind of hummed and hawed, and she named 3 people, and one of them was me. So I was chuffed. I was over the moon. I was excited. I was one of 3 guys that she liked. And this is where the embarrassing thing comes in. So I just learned that you could call girls. So every day for the next 3 weeks, I called her to find out if she'd made up her mind on who she liked. And you wouldn't believe it, but this kind of killed any interest she had in me. Also, I think one of the other guys on the list got annoyed with her and like yelled out during a game in the playground in front of all my classmates, "You can have her, Luke. I don't want her anymore." Anyway, Denise got completely sick of me very quickly, but I kept calling her every day. And then finally, about 3 weeks in, the word got around that she was really sick of me calling her every day. And so I didn't know. I was completely humiliated, and I didn't know what to do. So I asked a friend in class, I think it was Greg Williams, and he said, well, you got to play on their sympathy, like call her up and say you're really sorry and you'll never call her again. So I called her up and said I was really sorry and that I'd never call her again, and then I hung up. And then she found out my phone number, and like as girls do, they kind of try to palliate these things, and she called me back and said I wasn't bothering her. I mean, of course it was a lie, we all knew it was a lie, but it was a nice thing to do. And she was the best looking girl in the class. So yeah, I started having all these intense yearnings for love, and I think I wrote it up in my blog post in a really awkward way, in a way that was not good. I wrote it up as there was no love in my home, and that was not fair at all to my parents. It's just I felt completely lacking in love. And my parents loved me in their own way, but I think that sentiment of feeling like there was no love in my home was probably just a reflection of my, tremendous emotional neediness. And maybe I was just talking about like romantic love. I mean, by 7th, 8th grade, I wasn't really interested in my parents' love. That didn't really mean anything to me. I wanted a girl's love. And so I started listening to popular music in late 1979. I put the radio under my pillow at night and fall asleep listen to popular music till I get sleepy. KNBR, I think was the station. KNBR would play pop music, AM radio station. And I didn't do this at home because listening to popular music was a big sin. Complete no-no in my home, complete no-no in traditional Adventism. But when I got to stay with a friend of the family, the rules were a little more relaxed in some ways. So I'd listen to the radio at night under my pillow, and I just loved everything about it, like the DJs introducing and saying the first of like 35 minutes of commercial-free music, and then you'd hear the first few opening chords, and I'd just like guess the song, and I'd be really happy when it'd be a song that I liked, or sometimes I'd discover new songs. But by the end of 1979, Air Supply was my favorite group because their music just spoke to me more than any other group, any other singer on the radio. And I think there was once I met a girl that kind of had similar feelings like this. She remembered when she was a kid that she once said around 1980 to her parents, Air Supply is going to be bigger than the Beatles one day, right? Because they kept coming up. This is my blog, printed out my blog. Because they kept coming out with number one hit after number one hit, or top 10 hit after top 10 hit. So Wireless Flash did a story, May 2nd, 2005. LA man needs woman to celebrate Air Supply anniversary, 30th anniversary that Air Supply started, and it's an article about how I was looking for the right woman to celebrate. Anyway, I think through that, I did meet a woman who loved Air Supply, or perhaps it was through my blog, and she started writing me these long, emotionally rich letters. But she wasn't Jewish, and she couldn't even comprehend that I was Jewish. And so it kind of turned out to be a big letdown. Even though we both loved Air Supply, that wasn't enough. And yeah, so Ford hopes the woman is attractive, but something about as long as she's not more than 15 pounds overweight, that's fine. So yeah, it didn't actually mean anything to me that Air Supply was, we had that in common. I had one girlfriend who was from the Philippines, and she said Filipinos loved Air Supply, that kind of sappy music, and she could kind of gauge the emotional temperature of our relationship by how often I'd play Air Supply when I was cuddling with her, and when weeks and weeks would go by without me playing Air Supply, she was catching on that the love was at an ebb. But yeah, Air Supply was my favorite. My best friend ABBA was his favorite, and Air Supply was number 2. So for me, Air Supply was number 1. I think ABBA was in my top 10. But just love this Australian group. And when I went back to Australia, my brother told me Australians don't like Air Supply. They like harder rock like AC/DC. But yeah, I wrote a lot of long blog posts about my love for Air Supply. And so at age 52, kind of looking back on this, I still like Air Supply. I don't listen to it often as much, and it doesn't speak to me with the same intensity. And you know why? Because my love addiction is not nearly as severe as it once was. Like Air Supply is the music of love addiction. Like most popular music is the music of love addiction. It's all about being in love. Okay, it's that high, that excitement of being in love. There aren't many pop songs about the long-term relationships, about long-term marriage. Okay, it's about the high of falling in love and the agony of losing love and breaking up and making up and spying that woman across the room. So this group flashes out my emotional life, I think, until I got into 12 Step. Better than anything else. Yeah, I'd read novels like The Thornbirds by Colleen McCullough and the mini-series. That really fleshed out my inner life. I'd see movies like The Man from Snowy River and other movies that would kind of describe what's going on with my inner life. But I'd have friends who could empathize at times, so I had some connection. Started learning to kiss in, what was it, the summer, I think it was in the winter of 1982-83. Might even be New Year's Day 1983. I think that's when I learned to French kiss. So I was 16 going on 17, and kind of got a semi-girlfriend the summers of 82, 83. My other favorites were Barry Manilow, Simon and Garfunkel, Peter, Paul and Mary, Bette Midler's song The Rose, Chicago, Eye of the Tiger, and then by 83, 84, I started liking harder rock like the Eagles. Not the Eagles. I like the Eagles, but the Scorpions out of Germany. But whoa, Air Supply would just send shivers up my spine. That was the exciting thing about listening to music on the radio, is you never knew when the great songs were going to come along, and then when they did, and you just hear the first couple of chords, it was just such a thrill. Wow, here's a blog post I wrote, The Void Inside. I have this big emptiness inside that I'm always trying to fill by blogging about myself, self-publishing books about myself, Googling my name every week, checking Technorati daily for any reference to me, checking my email every 5 minutes, posting on chat boards to get a reaction. Just realized how empty my life is by emailing somebody who I expected had spam block, and I found myself thinking, good, I know I'll get a reply because I will get that automatic reply from a spam blocker. Like this is me in 2005 blogging. One of the things I hate about pitching an article is that half the times I do it, I get no reply, and when I do get a reply, it tends to come after a week or so. I so hate rejection because my own sense of worth is that fragile that I rarely pitch editors with stories, and I rarely ask out women I'm interested in if I think they're too beautiful or too good for me. Yeah, I've noticed that. I've had that phenomenon over the course of my life, that I'd feel a great deal of comfort in hitting on women up to a 7. Once they got beyond a 7, or once they were an 8 or above, I had no confidence in hitting on them. I don't think I've ever had confidence hitting on women who are an 8, 9, or a 10. And I'd go to parties, and my friends would try to set me up with women who were 8s or 9s or 10s, and I just completely lack confidence. And they go, well, what's wrong with you? My friends had the confidence to date beautiful women, but I did not. But when I was around a woman who was a 6 or a 7, I appreciated that she was above average in looks, and she didn't challenge my sense of worth. I felt that I was worthy of a 6 or a 7. But if she was an 8, I didn't feel worthy. So wow, this blog post, the void inside, I have this big emptiness inside that I always try to fill by seeking attention, blogging about myself, self-publishing books about myself, Googling my name every week, checking Technorati daily for any reference to myself, checking my email every 5 minutes, posting on chat boards to get a reaction. So this is like seeking narcissistic supply, and this is just like feeling worthless and shameful inside. One of the things I hate about pitching an article is that half the time I do it, I get no reply. See, I don't have enough sense of self at this point to put myself out there. I was living a very small, confined life because of the addiction to under-earning, addiction to hiding and biting, addiction to poverty, love addiction, sex addiction, porn addiction, fantasy addiction, maladaptive daydreaming. Wow. That was a small, unhappy, shame-filled, miserable life. I really only got to start turning around in mid-2015. I think I really began a dramatic turnaround. Ended 12-step in 2011, so I started getting some help back then. Got the old sex addiction under control. Bye-bye.